Joe Ingles is tied up underneath the basket by Westbrook. Ingles taking exception.
You will not believe how many fights the NBA's Joe Ingles has been involved in. We scoured the internet for a few of the greatest fights involving the legendary trash talker Joe Ingles of the Utah Jazz. Now, many of you know the name Joe Ingles as he's one of the most beloved players in the game right now. He's gotten into it with tons of players throughout his NBA career, but we've compiled a list of the best fights that he's had to date. What players do you think will be making the list? The first fight came back in a game between the Utah Jazz and the Oklahoma City Thunder. There was about 5 minutes remaining in the first half, with the Thunder leading by 17 points. Ricky Rubio picked up the ball and found himself on a fast break, pump faking Paul George off the court, but then blowing the open layup. Luckily, Ingles was there to snatch away the rebound, but when he went up for a second chance, Russell Westbrook flew in and tangled him up. At first, it seemed all normal until the two sides both stopped and exchanged some words. The nearest referee, along with Steven Adams, quickly jumped in between the two to avoid the situation getting any worse, and luckily they succeeded. In the end, there was no physical confrontation, but I'm pretty sure there would have been if nobody had intervened as early as they did. Surprisingly though, Ingles did get into a fight with another player on this court, but you'll just have to stick around to find out which player that was. However, before we move on, there happens to be another fight involving Ingles and Westbrook at a later date. Westbrook attempted a pass to a teammate, but it was swatted away. As the ball was rolling down the court and out of bounds, both Ingles and Russ ran after it in an attempt to keep it in play. The two ended up getting a little tangled, and Ingles tumbled into the front row of the stands, crashing into a couple of fans sitting courtside. He sprung up awfully quickly to confront Westbrook, but Russ just slapped his arm away from him, and the refs quickly jumped in before the altercation could escalate. I guess it's safe to say that these two won't be going out to dinner anytime soon, huh? Moving on though, Ingles found himself in a heated scuffle with James Harden this time. The funny thing about this fight is that it took less than 1/4 of the game to get it started. The Jazz were up against the Houston Rockets, and there was 5 minutes left in the opening frame of action. On this possession, Ingles had the basketball and drove into the lane before kicking it out to an open man behind the three-point line. But while doing so, it appeared he hit Harden in the jaw when he went to pass it, seemingly aggravating him, but neither player shared any words just yet. On the very next possession, Ingles switched on to Harden and jumped up to kick an attempted pass from him. Then, after the whistle was blown for a kick ball violation, Ingles slapped the ball away from Harden when he went to pick it up. This prompted Ingles to follow Harden for a little bit with a few choice words to say until a ref stepped in between to pull him away. The second that Ingles was being backed off, Harden flipped around and started spouting off at Ingles as well, getting pushed away shortly afterwards. Harden was the one who was handed a technical foul for the altercation, and he was not happy about it at all. Kind of like how this former Thunder player was furious after getting into it with Ingles on the baseline. Stick around to find out the whole story there. For now, we can talk about the fight he had with Blake Griffin and the Detroit Pistons. The Jazz were able to pick up a huge win over the Pistons by a score of 194 in this matchup, but it wasn't always going that well for Utah. Ingles was whistled for an offensive foul call late in the ballgame, and he made sure to let Blake know that he wasn't going to take flopping from him. Cameras saw him mouth the words, "You're a flopper," as the two walked back down the court together. At the time, they both looked like they were going to laugh it off and move on, but Ingles definitely had another plan in mind. With the game winding down, Ingles was able to knock down a very clutch three-pointer to clinch the game for the Jazz. Right after the ball went in, he turned around and blew a kiss to multiple Pistons fans in the front few rows of the stands. Then, as he walked down the court, he turned around one more time and yelled, "You talk too much." Now this next fight involves a double technical foul. Ingles was attempting to drive into the lane with Austin Rivers right on his hip. The two had apparently gotten way too close to one another because they sort of got tangled up, and it prompted one of the referees to whistle for a foul. Ingles turned the opposite direction of Rivers and tossed the ball behind his back, hitting Rivers with it. Even though it may have been an accident, Rivers turned around as if it was on purpose and threw it right back at Ingles. Ingles, of course, wasn't very happy with that, so he was calling for Rivers to be hit with a technical over it, but the official called for both of them to get technical fouls there. Both players were furious, but Ingles was beyond mad that he was given a tech for something he didn't even know that he did. It took 2 to 3 Jazz players to hold him back as he berated the referee who called him for the foul. All the while, Rivers was standing a little over to his side, talking away, fueling the fire between these two players. Just like how the fire was burning pretty bright between our final fight, and that's coming up in just a few more minutes. Now, with Joe Ingles, it doesn't matter who you are. If you decide to get in his way and trash talk him, he will make sure to give it right back to you no matter the cost. The Jazz were up against the San Antonio Spurs a while back, with it being a pretty close game with just 4 minutes remaining in the third quarter. Ingles drove quickly into the paint for a layup, but was quickly met by the hands of Pau Gasol, immediately getting the ball thrown into the ground and a foul being whistled. The two immediately walked right over to one another after the whistle and got into each other's faces, trash-talking the whole time. It took a few players to get them separated, but it seemed like the fight was all in good fun, as they were both seen laughing while walking away. Now we get to that fight that you've all been waiting for, when Ingles got into a physical altercation with the now Los Angeles Clippers forward Paul George. Make sure you're strapped in here because Ingles and George have quite the history with one another, and it's not a very good one. One of the many incidents between these two players happened before a point was even scored in a game. During the first possession of the ballgame, George and Ingles got wrapped up at the bottom of the screen. Ingles didn't seem like he was doing anything to fight him, but George not only shoved him back, but wrapped his arms around him and threw him out of bounds, where he was eventually whistled for a foul. These two guys went face to face for a while as they argued with each other, though even after they were split up, they could be seen jawing at one another while they set up for the next possession, so I guess the beef hadn't quite cooled off just yet. The Jazz and the Thunder met up again that same season, and the two still hated each other. George was on the sideline waiting for the official to hand him the ball so he could inbound it. Ingles stepped up to defend George and was mere inches away from him. George was kneeling over at the time, but quickly stood up and gave Ingles a hard shove back. That led to a large scuffle that took place, with a few Jazz players jumping in to defend their forward. That shove ended up sending a message for the entire game. And did I mention that this happened to be Game 3 of a playoff series between the teams? Well, that was yet another reason why emotions were so high. But later on in this matchup, Ricky Rubio was working on the perimeter in an effort to get up a nice shot. He couldn't find one, but he hit an open Ingles behind the arc. Ingles splashed the jump shot right in the face of George, and boy did he let him hear about it afterwards. He actually stopped right after it went through and went forehead to forehead against him. I can only imagine the words that were shared were not very pretty, and that was obvious after they continued their hatred later on. George had picked up the basketball after a whistle was blown, and he tried walking over to the nearest referee to hand it to him. Ingles was following him the entire way though, and was trying to pick the ball up from him in order to inbound it for his team. George wasn't having any of it and held it away from Ingles, eventually shoving his arm out of the way before passing the ball to a ref. Then when he turned around, he gave Ingles another little bump before setting back up defensively. Ingles has been around the block a number of times when it comes to fights and trash talk, but he has gone at it with George more than any other player in the league right now. Similar to Russell Westbrook, it doesn't appear that George and Ingles will smooth things over just yet either, but then again, you never know. Addicted to watching NBA fights? Well, you're in luck. Click on the video that appears on your screen to keep watching more fights involving your favorite NBA players, and let us know in the comments below who we should make a video about next.